another angle on this, actually, that I can't help thinking as well, is the importance of, and the perception of the importance of information within the enterprise is growing anyway. You know, we're seeing, you know, obviously Facebook is a classic case of that made people realise just how important just gathering information is. You know, it's incredible value in information. So your CIO, his responsibility should be applying that knowledge and possibilities of the information within the business model. And I think the real visionary CIOs are going to be incredibly valuable to business
absolutely
over the next few years.
Yeah. And I think this is what I saw in the CCIO, the clinical. What they've actually seen is information. Because when you talk to the CCIOs, most of them are talking about patient records. That's what they see as important. Access to patient records in different clinics, in the operating theatre, they want that information. And the CIO hasn't been delivering it. That's why they're taking this role on. That didn't exist as a discussion a couple of years ago. Why has it come about? It's a big campaign in the health industry now. It's come about because the CIOs haven't engaged with their key users.
It's come about because of the failure of the National Programme for IT.
It actually, that's what's driven it, but actually, it should have, technology failed to deliver.
Yeah, but it was taken completely outside of the organisation and became technology for technology's sake, which is breaking all of your rules, really.
Yeah. And that's why it failed. And actually, the origins of that failure, I was involved right at the very beginning of the project, because Sun supplied a lot of the core systems for patient records for the spine. And right at the beginning, it was entirely driven by using the latest technology for the latest technology's sake. And they were using technologies that were unproven. I had my instructors teaching technologies that they barely knew how to use themselves. And yet that was the foundation of a 10-year program that was going to be put into the hands of people that didn't want to understand the technology. Why did we all take such risks doing that? It was because it was driven by technologists
And procurement.
Yeah, but there was a lot of technology driving it without looking at the business.
Isn't that the problem even now, that IT or ICT, whatever you want to call it, departments, divisions, don't actually know what they are within an organisation? So if you take the Lloyds Banking Group, for example, I'm not sure whether IT sees itself as a support function or actual leadership and strategic function. And in governments, generically speaking, I'm not being specific here, just saying they can have that same dilemma.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure IT sometimes knows what it is, therefore the CIO does not know how that individual can contribute to the strategic direction of the business and the leadership of the business.
I think that's very true, and I think that it's well instantiated in government here. Senior officers event a couple of years ago here, there were several presentations from different parts of government focusing, although they didn't say so explicitly, but what the presentations focused on was the need to create more and better information within different parts of government. And at the end I piped up the question, I said, you know, actually if you want to get this right, then shouldn't you change Alan's job title to be Chief Information Officer and make the role focusing on delivering the information that government needs? And the response
from me actually, Steve,
the non-IT civil servants back again was no. You know, we all, each of us chief executives of different departments, etc., with no IT knowledge, we are all responsible for the information, we all determine what and yet none of them, not a man of them, had information skills. Probably not a man of them could actually define what information is in comparison with, say, data. And so you've got the business claiming ownership of this very, very precious resource, and at times not allowing the specialists to actually work on it, and that's actually happening here. So it is conflicted in that sense, and knowing where the boundaries are is difficult.
Just an example from the OU, actually what we've done is, if you think about the Open University entirely exists through its online presence. There's no other delivery means now. That its website is the Open University. And 2 years ago, the head of IT reported up through 3 levels of the organisation. And yet that's the core of the business, that is the business, is information. So 2 years ago we appointed a CIO who reports directly into the Vice-Chancellor and has equal status with all of the other functions of the university. Since then, actually the university is now orientating itself around the information. And because we only have two types of core information. We have our student information and we have our teaching resources. If you take those 2 away, we don't have a business. So it should have been at that level because it actually drives the whole business. Now what we're seeing is a rapid acceleration of new technologies being introduced because we need to, because they're going to drive the business. Mobile learning has gone from something that's been played around with in the IT function to, we have decided as a business that we need to be the leading provider of mobile learning. So every course that's come out this year is fully enabled and works best on mobile devices. Now that wouldn't have happened 2 years ago. We've set the level appropriately for the business.
I've got a question for you. We've talked a lot about CIOs. CIOs are an interesting creature there. It's board level people operating in businesses which are consuming IT. But a large part of the IT industry is actually, and where people get their training, is actually the IT sector itself as an industry in its own right. And to what extent do you think that the technology focus there has a negative impact on people's ability to make this leap, because they come from an industry which is all about and are essentially trained to try and sell technology or to perpetuate a particular proprietary technology?
Yeah. It's quite, having come from that world myself, it's quite interesting. The best organisations, eSkills, that I work with a lot, has recognised that actually you've got IT users and then the IT providers. And the best thing to do is separate them, treat them completely separately, because the IT providers need to be engaged in this type of discussion because they're not actually paying much attention to how their technology is used. And yes, the providers, the vendors particularly, are probably the people I have the most interesting discussions with about this, because they actually don't know in that much detail how their technology is really used and what's done with it and how it affects businesses. They can talk about it very well, but particularly the large vendors were the landscape I came from. Actually, I take this back into them now and play this to them because it's a discussion that's totally new. And most of this has come from the user community. So all of this thinking is almost entirely driven by IT consumers. So yeah, I think the vendors probably have a lot to learn, and I think the fact that I'm now taking this into the vendor landscape and just introducing them to things like, what does Sophia say? They all know of Sophia. The one thing I really like about Sophia is wherever I go, either in the user community, but particularly in the vendors and in government bodies, majority of them know of Sophia or have heard of it. Don't know what it means, but there is an awareness. But actually, within the user side, they know a bit more than that. They know what it could do to help the business. In the provider side, it's complete blank.
So there's a challenge there.
There is a big challenge to actually educate the industry.
So just picking up on that then, if you look at what's required for level 7, there's very little in there that's actually technology based.
Yeah.
Are you better taking somebody for CIO with a non-technology basis and teaching the technology elements, or are you better taking somebody all the way from the start and pulling them all the way through and finishing up with a CIO? Which is the quick? If you're sat as the MD of an organisation, who makes the better candidate?
It's a great question.
Can I just add a little supplementary to that, because I'm interested in the skill set that you had down there. I think you've missed up one fundamental one, or very, very important one, and that's clairvoyant.
Unfortunately, we don't have a severe skill for that.
Absolutely, but sort of technology is changing so quickly.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with David, and interested from an educational point of view when you look at those postgraduate courses that you're going to. How does that shape that postgraduate course? Because where do you pull that CIO of the future from a technical background? And in my experience, and I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room who may agree or disagree, but from my experience, somebody who's focused on technology tends to work in a very closed environment of that technology and doesn't necessarily see how that impacts on the business, whereas somebody with more visionary skills can adapt the technology to suit the business. How does that impact on your postgraduate model?
To answer your question first, Dave, the quickest route right now is actually to take somebody who's a potential CEO candidate and introduce them to the technology right now.
So it's to pull them backwards rather than forwards,
Yeah.
to a certain extent.
Yeah. The point I was trying to make at the end on the push and pull diagram is that's what we've got to do now, but that isn't ideal for the industry. We should actually have a progression through, but it actually means we need to address it at all levels of education. And I think what we've seen with the GCSE curriculum, the A-level curriculum, it's completely lost its connection to the way technology is used. And that's why it's like the OU is now getting involved in that discussion very intensely, because actually when you start getting people coming through the school system, through undergraduate degrees, with that understanding about the impact of technology on business and the understanding of how they might develop as a business leader, you end up with people that could fill a CIO role, that could move to a CEO. We did this last year with our undergraduate programme, where actually one pathway through is 50% business, 50% IT. But the business side of it is to try and start developing some of those competencies that I've been talking about, so that you start them early. But there's no pipeline at the moment. So there's a few people running a programme that eSchool started called IT Management and Business. And yeah, there's a small handful of people coming through. But as a general approach, there isn't a pipeline to draw on. It shut down best part of 10 years ago. 2000, there's a very interesting diagram from eSchools. A-level intake to computing went up and up and up to 2000 and then went off a cliff. What happened at that point was the ICT curriculum was introduced in the UK. And that ICT curriculum turned everybody off because it was no longer relevant.
It's the worst thing ever.
Yeah.
It's right about how to use a mouse.
So
it's the ridiculous thing I've ever seen.
it's digital literacy. It's nothing to do with the use of technology in business. So we've actually got a 12-year void now to fill. So we're not going to fill that quickly. So if you need a CIO now, you're going to have to take a CEO candidate. But what we need to do is start developing that pipeline. But that pipeline isn't there in general at the moment. Certainly in anyone that's been following the UK GCSE type curriculum, it's just not there.